I think we have proven to ourselves and to the world that we can do things that seem impossible. I had this plan from the very beginning, even if it sounded completely insane. We had to develop everything from scratch. It was something completely unbelievable.
A teenager in Croatia builds an electric car in his parents' garage. The automotive world barely notices. 17 years later, that same teenager controls Bugatti, supplies technology to Porsche and Ferrari, breaks world records, and stands at the center of the most important transformation in automotive history. How did Mate Rimac go from modifying an old BMW to becoming the man trusted with one of the most legendary names in motoring? How did a startup nobody took seriously force the entire industry to rethink the future of performance? Today, we'll explore the inventions, the risks, the records, the Bugatti takeover, and the vision that changed hypercars forever. The boy who challenged the future. On the 12th of February 1988, Mate Rimac was born in Livno, a small city in Bosnia and Herzegovina that most people outside the region have never heard of. His family moved to Croatia when he was a child, settling into a country that was still finding its footing after the turbulent breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s.
The fragile peace in Yugoslavia is more fragile than ever. Truce talks between federal officials and the Republic of Slovenia broke down again today.
There was no automotive dynasty in the Rimac family, no grandfather who had raced at Le Mans, no father with connections to the boardrooms of Stuttgart or Maranello. There was just a curious, restless boy who became obsessed with how things worked and who refused to accept that the way things were was necessarily the way they had to be. From a very young age, Rimac did not consume information the way most children did. He consumed it the way engineers do, always asking not just what something was, but why it worked, and how it could be made to work better. The first concrete sign that Rimac was operating on a different frequency came when he was 17 years old. While most of his peers were focused on the ordinary preoccupations of teenage life, Rimac was in his room designing a vehicle rear-view mirror system engineered to eliminate the driver's blind spot. A practical, functional solution to one of the most persistent safety problems in everyday driving. The invention was not a school project or a daydream. It worked, it was patentable, and it earned him recognition at a national level. What it really was, looking back, was the first data point in a pattern that would repeat itself for the next 2 decades. A young man identifying something that everyone else had accepted as an unsolvable inconvenience, and solving it anyway. By the time he enrolled at university, Rimac had already decided that the future of automotive performance was electric. This was not a popular opinion in 2009. The automotive establishment, the engineers, the executives, the journalists, the collectors who spent their weekends at Goodwood and Pebble Beach, looked at electric vehicles and saw compromises. They saw range anxiety. They saw silence where there should have been sound. They saw the potential erasure of everything that made performance, driving a visceral, emotional, irreplaceable experience. The idea that electricity could produce a car that would make a petrol enthusiast feel something, really feel something. In the chest, in the spine, in the part of the brain that responds to speed and drama, was considered, in most professional circles, somewhere between optimistic and delusional. Rimac did not care. At 21 years old, with no external funding and no manufacturing facility, he founded Rimac Automobili in his parents' garage in Croatia. His starting point was a 1988 BMW Series 3 that he stripped down and rebuilt from the ground up as an electric vehicle. Not because it was an efficient use of a classic car, but because it was the most direct way he could think of to test whether his belief about electric performance was correct. The BMW became a rolling laboratory, it became a drag race weapon, and it became the proof of concept that would eventually change the direction of an entire industry. But in 2009, it was just a Croatian kid, a borrowed garage, and an idea that nobody in the automotive world was taking seriously. In 2011, at the Frankfurt Motor Show, Rimac unveiled the Concept 1,
This is Alistair Weaver for Inside Line in Frankfurt, Germany, with highlights of the world's biggest auto show.
And the automotive world was forced, for the first time, to pay genuine attention. The Concept One was not a show car or a vague promise of future technology. It was a production hypercar, the world's first fully electric production hypercar, producing 1,000 horsepower and delivering performance figures that matched and in some areas exceeded the fastest petrol-powered cars on Earth. Only 8 examples would be built, each priced at $1 million. The industry's response ranged from genuine astonishment to barely concealed disbelief. But the car existed. The numbers were real, and Mate Rimac was 23 years old, standing next to a machine he had built from nothing, watching the establishment try to process what they were seeing. Building the impossible, the Concept One opened a door. But walking through it required something that engineering genius alone could never provide. It required capital, it required credibility, and it required the trust of companies that had been building cars for a century longer than Rimac had been alive. Most automotive startups, regardless of how technically brilliant their founders are, never survive long enough to become real businesses. The gap between building one extraordinary car and building a company capable of supplying technology to the world's largest manufacturers is vast. And the road between them is littered with the wreckage of visionaries who ran out of money, patience, or both before they could bridge it. What Rimac understood, and what most of his contemporaries in the EV startup space missed entirely, was that the hypercar was never the product. The hypercar was the advertisement. The real product was the technology underneath it. And Rimac began selling that technology with the same relentlessness he had brought to building it. The battery management systems, the electric motors, the torque vectoring software, the e-axle assemblies, all of it had been developed to make the Concept One and its successors perform at the level of the world's best petrol hypercars. But those same components were precisely what the established manufacturers needed as they began their own accelerating march toward electrification. And the established manufacturers, for all their century-old resources and engineering heritage, did not have what Rimac had. They had not spent years obsessing over every kilowatt-hour and every millisecond of torque response in the context of extreme performance. Rimac had, and he was willing to sell that obsession. The partnerships that followed were remarkable in their breadth, and in what they signaled about the industry's silent acknowledgement that something had shifted. Porsche became both an investor and a technology partner, the brand that represented perhaps the most successful synthesis of performance and engineering rigor in automotive history, coming to a Croatian startup for electric powertrain technology. Ferrari, whose entire identity was built on the emotional power of combustion, integrated Rimac's electric components into its hybrid systems. Hyundai invested directly and embedded Rimac technology into its own performance vehicles. BMW came, Aston Martin came. The supply relationships multiplied. Rimac Technology, the division that managed these partnerships, grew steadily to more than 1,000 employees, with its Croatian headquarters expanding and satellite offices opening across the United Kingdom and continental Europe. While the technology supply business was growing, Rimac Automobili continued building its own cars, and those cars continued to rewrite the record books with each generation. The Nevera followed the Concept One. Where the Concept One had been proof that electric performance was possible, the Nevera was proof that electric performance was dominant. 1,813 horsepower.
Oh, you got almost 2,000 horsepower Rimac electric supercar, arguably the best electric technology on the planet, and people are trying to beat them, but they can't. 0 to 60, 1.8 seconds.
23 production car world records set in a single day at a high-speed proving ground in Germany. A car that demonstrated, in the most public and measurable way possible, that the fastest petrol hypercars on Earth were no longer the fastest hypercars on Earth. And then came the Nevera R, 40 examples, each priced at $2.5 million. which traveled to the same automotive testing Papenburg proving ground in Germany in July of 2025 and shattered 24 production car world records in 4 days of independently verified testing by Doosoft. 0 to 60 miles per hour in 1.72 seconds. 0 to 186 miles per hour in 7.89 seconds. The Koenigsegg Jesko Absolute's previous record for the 0 to 249 miles per hour and back to a complete stop. A record that had seemed untouchable, beaten by more than 4 seconds. By 2021, the company that had started with one man and one BMW had become one of the most technically sophisticated automotive businesses on the planet. Engineers were leaving Ferrari and Lamborghini and Porsche to work for Rimac, not because the salary was necessarily better, but because what was being built in Sveta Nedelja was more interesting than anything happening anywhere else. The automotive world had spent a decade trying to categorize Rimac, startup, supplier, curiosity, disruptor, and had never found a category that fully fit. What was about to happen would make the question of categorization irrelevant entirely. The boy who bought Bugatti by 2020, whispers were spreading through the automotive industry that Volkswagen Group was considering options for Bugatti's future. On paper, the brand was one of the most prestigious names in the history of motoring. It was the company that gave the world the Type 35, one of the most successful racing cars ever built. It was the company that shocked the modern era with the Veyron, a machine that redefined what people believed was possible from a road car. And it was the company that followed that achievement with the Chiron, pushing performance even further. But prestige and profitability are rarely the same thing. Bugatti produced only a handful of vehicles each year. Development costs were enormous. Regulations were becoming stricter across Europe, China, and other major markets. The era of massive combustion engines was facing increasing pressure, and Volkswagen had to answer a difficult question. How do you preserve one of the most iconic automotive brands in the world while preparing it for a future that looked increasingly electric? Several potential solutions were discussed behind closed doors. Financial groups had money. Established manufacturers had resources. But most lacked something crucial. They could buy Bugatti, but could they define its future? Then a different name entered the conversation: Mate Rimac. At first glance, the idea sounded almost absurd. A Croatian entrepreneur who had started in a garage was now being discussed as the future owner of a company founded more than a century earlier by Ettore Bugatti. Yet the more industry insiders examined the possibility, the more logical it became. Rimac had spent more than a decade developing exactly the technologies that high-performance manufacturers would need in the years ahead. His company had become a supplier and technology partner to major names including Porsche, Hyundai, Aston Martin, and others. The Nevera project had already demonstrated that electric performance could compete with, and in some cases exceed, the capabilities of traditional hypercars. More importantly, Rimac was not interested in destroying Bugatti's identity. He understood what made the brand special. That distinction mattered. On November 1, 2021, the automotive world received its answer. Bugatti and Rimac officially became Bugatti Rimac, a joint venture with Rimac Group.
A lot of great information that's coming out in the automotive industry, a lot of juicy news, so hey, let's not waste any more time, let's just get right into it. Now, in a press release on Monday, they stated that the new company will be called Bugatti Rimac. Now, the merger will still allow the two companies to work independently, but it will be acknowledged that the companies will combine resources and engineers for both research and development.
Holding 55% ownership and Porsche retaining 45%. At just 33 years old, Mate Rimac became CEO of the company responsible for one of the most legendary names in automotive history. The announcement immediately became global news. Yet one detail captured almost as much attention as the deal itself. While executives around him appeared in traditional corporate attire, Rimac arrived wearing shorts and sneakers. The image quickly spread across automotive media worldwide. For many observers, it perfectly symbolized the changing of the guard. This was not a career executive who had climbed a corporate ladder. This was an engineer and entrepreneur who had built his reputation through innovation rather than tradition. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. A man who had once converted an old BMW into an electric race car was now responsible for Bugatti. Then came the next challenge. Rather than abandoning combustion engines, Rimac approved one of the most ambitious powertrains ever fitted to a production car. The result was Bugatti Tourbillon. Powered by a naturally aspirated 8.3-liter V16 developed with Cosworth and supported by 3 electric motors, the car produced a combined 1,775 horsepower. It was not merely a replacement for the Chiron, it was a statement. The Tourbillon proved that Bugatti could embrace future technology without abandoning the emotional character that had defined the brand for generations. The response was immediate. All 250 planned examples were effectively spoken for years before production began, despite a price approaching $5 million. Then came another image that captured the industry's attention. During winter testing in the Alps, Mate Rimac was photographed personally, driving a Tourbillon prototype through snow-covered mountain roads. There was no marketing stunt, no staged presentation, just the CEO behind the wheel, validating the machine himself. That image told the story better than any press release ever could. Bugatti had not been handed to a financial investor. It had been handed to a builder. The master of two worlds running two of the most technically demanding hypercar brands in the world simultaneously.
Very soon we will start to produce pre-series cars and then after that customer cars.
While also overseeing Rimac Technologies' supply relationships with Hyundai, BMW, Porsche, and others, would have been sufficient to define an entire career for most people in the industry. For Rimac, it was the baseline. The daily reality of his position was one of almost incomprehensible complexity. On one side, Rimac Automobili was producing the Nevera R, a fully electric machine with 2,107 horsepower that had just broken 24 world records and represented the most extreme argument possible for why the future of performance was electric. On the other side, Bugatti was producing the Tourbillon, a hybrid grand tourer with a hand-built V16 that represented the most sophisticated argument possible for why combustion still had something irreplaceable to offer the world. Both arguments were his, both cars were his responsibility, and both had waiting lists that extended years into the future. In February of 2026, Rimac made a decision that reflected the evolving reality of his position. He stepped back from the day-to-day chief executive role at Rimac Technology, the supply division, handing operational leadership to Nurdan Pitarevic, an executive who had joined the company in 2024 with 12 years of experience at automotive supplier Continental behind him. Rimac remained as president of the Rimac Group overall, maintaining strategic oversight of the technology business. But the signal was unmistakable. He was consolidating his focus on the hypercar brands, on the products that carried his name and Bugatti's name, on the decisions that would shape what both companies meant to the automotive world for the next generation. He was not stepping back. He was stepping forward into the part of the business that mattered most to him. But even as his position at the top of the hypercar world solidified, the structure beneath it remained complicated in ways that had begun to create real friction. Porsche's 45% stake in Bugatti Rimac meant that every significant long-term decision, every major investment, every new model direction, every strategic pivot required alignment with a corporate partner that was navigating its own considerable challenges. Porsche was dealing with the complexities of transitioning one of the most beloved petrol sports car brands in history toward an electrified future. Its priorities, its timelines, and its appetite for risk were shaped by pressures that had nothing to do with Bugatti. For Rimac, who had spent his entire career moving faster than the industry expected and making decisions that required conviction rather than consensus, this structural reality was beginning to define the limits of what was possible. In October of 2025, Rimac made his move. Reports emerged that he had made a formal offer to acquire Porsche's 45% stake in Bugatti Rimac, a transaction that would value the joint venture at approximately $1.1 billion in total. When Bloomberg asked him directly about the discussions, he did not deflect or qualify. He told them plainly that it was no secret he was in talks with Porsche, and that his goal was simply to be able to make long-term decisions and long-term investments in a different way, without having to justify every choice to 50 different stakeholders who each had their own agenda. The transparency was characteristic. Rimac had never been a person who obscured his intentions. He wanted full control of Bugatti. He had lined up the investors to pay for it, and he was telling the world exactly what he was planning to do. The financial architecture of the deal was elaborate but coherent. A New York-based venture capital firm called HOF Capital led the acquiring consortium. Blue 5 Capital came in as the largest individual investor within that consortium. A broader group of institutional investors from across the United States and Europe rounded out the funding. The structure was designed not to antagonize Rimac's existing position, but to support it. HOF Capital would become a significant shareholder in Rimac Group alongside Rimac himself, providing the capital and the long-term partnership that would fund the next phase of what both Rimac and Bugatti were trying to become. The Croatian entrepreneur, who had needed his parents' garage to get started, was now orchestrating a billion-dollar ownership restructuring of one of the world's most iconic industrial brands. And he was doing it, characteristically, on his own terms. What happens next? In April 2026, one of the most remarkable stories in modern automotive history entered a new chapter. Porsche confirmed agreements to sell its stakes in Bugatti Rimac and Rimac Group to a consortium led by HOF Capital, a move that, pending final approvals, would leave Mate Rimac with unprecedented influence over the future of both companies. For most people, this was just another corporate transaction. For the automotive world, it was something much bigger. 17 years earlier, Rimac had been a young engineer working on an electric BMW in a garage. Now he was standing at the center of an industry transformation, overseeing brands responsible for some of the fastest and most technologically advanced vehicles ever built. The timing could not be more significant. The Bugatti Tourbillon is already sold out years in advance, with production expected to continue through 2029. Every car will be hand-built in Molsheim, continuing a tradition that stretches back more than a century. Yet behind the scenes, the question everyone is asking remains unanswered. What comes after the Tourbillon? Will Bugatti continue developing combustion-powered masterpieces? Will the V16 survive beyond this generation?
Whole rear powertrain system, this is what's powering the rear wheels. So which consists of the V16 naturally aspirated engine, 8-speed double clutch transmission with the torque vectoring E-diff in the rear.
Or will the company eventually embrace full electrification under the leadership of the man who built the world's most successful electric hypercar company? Nobody outside Bugatti's inner circle knows. What we do know is that the automotive landscape is changing faster than ever before. Governments around the world continue pushing stricter emissions regulations. Battery technology improves every year. Charging networks expand across Europe, North America, and Asia. The industry is moving toward electrification, whether traditional manufacturers like it or not, and that places Mate Rimac in a unique position. Unlike many executives forced to choose between old technology and new technology, Rimac understands both worlds. He oversees the Nevera, a machine that shattered performance records and demonstrated what electric power can achieve. At the same time, he approved the development of the Tourbillon, a car powered by one of the most ambitious combustion engines ever installed in a road car. Few people in automotive history have had credibility in both camps. Meanwhile, Rimac Technology continues working on future battery systems and advanced electric powertrain solutions. If solid-state battery technology reaches commercial viability, it could dramatically improve range, charging speeds, and energy density across the entire industry. The company that once modified a single BMW is now helping shape what future electric vehicles may become. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this story has nothing to do with horsepower, battery chemistry, or billion-dollar deals. It is the reminder that industries are not changed by institutions. They are changed by individuals willing to challenge assumptions everyone else accepts as fact. The experts said electric hypercars would never replace combustion performance. Rimac proved otherwise. The experts said a startup from Croatia could never compete with the giants of Germany and Italy. Rimac proved otherwise. And now the same engineer who started with a garage project is helping determine the future of Bugatti itself. The next chapter has not been written yet. But if the last 17 years have taught us anything, it is that betting against Mate Rimac has rarely been a winning strategy. From a Croatian garage to sole owner of Bugatti in 17 years, he built the fastest electric car ever made. He supplied technology to Ferrari and Porsche. He wore shorts to the most important press conference of his career. And then he bought out the corporate giant that had been his partner. The garage, the records, the billion-dollar deal. Mate Rimac did not climb the ladder. He built a different one entirely. So drop a comment right now. With full control of Bugatti, what do you think happens next? Does the V16 survive? Hit that like button if this story hit differently. Subscribe and stay close, because next time we go inside the man who rebuilt a crashed $6 million Bugatti that even Rimac said was finished.